the truth about the Jehovah's Witnesses 10-part series, answer to every question you may have and questions you need to be asking, part 10 of 10. This is actually take 2 for me because I had this entire video done and filmed yesterday and it would not transfer onto my computer, so in the process of troubleshooting it to get it off my phone, it accidentally got deleted. And I spent the whole day today trying to buy recovery software and downloaded how many of those in the attempts to recover it somehow. But it didn't work, so here we are filming it a second time. So this video is going to be frequently asked questions that were found on YouTube and Google exclusively. The top searched questions. There's about, I don't even know, maybe 100 of them. I didn't even count. We're going to get straight into these, and I'm also going to cover just some points. Without the question, I'll just give you guys some basic information. So number one, well, I'm not even going to number them, so just forget I said that. What were the Jehovah's Witnesses called before being called Jehovah's Witnesses? They were called Bible students in the early 1900s. Where do the leaders of the Watchtower live? The 8 governing body, or the leaders of the Jehovah's Witnesses, live on a compound in Warwick, New York. They live expense-free in this compound, and they manage the organization from there. How many Jehovah's Witnesses are there? There's roughly 8.6 million witnesses. What do and don't the Jehovah's Witnesses celebrate? The Jehovah's Witnesses celebrate pretty much just the death of Christ, or the memorial, and weddings. They don't. They also, in the memorial, they don't usually partake of the bread and the wine. They have that kind of reserved for kind of those that consider themselves to be the elite 144,000 in the organization. So they just pass the cup and the bread, and they don't participate the way that most people in the Protestant world would. So for the things they don't do Christmas, Easter, they don't celebrate Halloween, birthdays, Valentine's, any of the Jewish or biblical feasts like Hanukkah, Passover, Sukkot. They don't do any of those things. They also don't do things like, St. Patrick's Day, New Year's Day, all of that. So the next one is, when did the Watchtower prophesy that the world would end? They claimed in their writings that the world would end many, many times, but the primary times in question that people know about are 1914, 1918, 1925, and 1975. How long did the Jehovah's Witnesses forbid organ transplants for, and what happened if you took one during that period of time? They forbid the transplants for 13 years, and during that time, if you took a transplant, you would be disfellowshipped. In what ways have the Jehovah's Witnesses demonstrated clear hypocrisy? There are a lot of ways that we covered in videos 1 through 9. The majority of those can be summarized into strategic changes that they claim were given by divine direction, shunning, disobedience to the laws of the land, such as with the child sex abuse cases, not obeying the judicial mandates and things such as that, and other areas where they have instructed their members to disobey the laws of the land, such as in Malawi, which we're going to talk about, and so forth. The next one where they have demonstrated some hypocrisy is if you go back into the very early writings of the Watchtower, there was a lot of Freemasonry, Egyptology, astrology, pyramidology, spiritism, and a lot of things like that. A lot of the imagery, a lot of the use of the type of language that's used in Freemasonry. And at that time, that was actually quite foundational and normal parts of their writings. I'm not saying they are Freemasons, but definitely Russell, the founder of the Watchtower, he was very interested in all those kinds of dynamics, and so he wrote about those concepts quite a bit. But where the hypocrisy comes in is modern Jehovah's Witness teaching teaches against all of that as idolism and Satanism and stuff like that. So there's a lot of hypocrisy and the changes in their own literature on that kind of stuff. And the last one I'm going to cover for now is the teachings regarding not being part of the world, while yet they operate like a massive corporate financial empire. Very, very, very rich, yet they instruct others to have nothing to do with the world, politics, money, stuff like that. Did the Watchtower always forbid the celebration of Christmas? Absolutely not. I have some images that I'm going to show you guys. This one here, don't mind my messy writing, can you see it? This is basically printouts of their own. This is the Golden Age, one of their little booklets. And here in the Golden Age, 1921, December 7th, page 159, they are celebrating the Christmas at Bethel. This is the meal that they're celebrating. And in the photograph that I had the little arrow pointing to, they were advertising something called the Desmond's Miracle Oil. This was a product of the Watchtower. And it says, a chance to make some money. And then it's an advertisement that you can buy this oil off of the Watchtower and sell it to make some Christmas spending money. Here's another picture, Christmas morning at Bethel. This is with 4 of the leaders there are participating in Christmas there. And that's from, which page is this? This is another one from the Golden Age. So what they were told was they could go and purchase this miracle oil from the Watchtower and sell it to make Christmas money, and then you could go buy presents with it. That's what they were told. I'm going to read you a little bit here from Zion's Watchtower 1904, page 364, where it says, even though Christmas is not the real anniversary of our Lord's birth, but more properly the Annunciation Day or date of his human begetting, nevertheless, since the celebration of the Lord's birth is not a matter of divine appointment or injunction, but merely a tribute of respect to him, it is not necessary for us to quibble particularly about the date. We may as well join the civilized world in celebrating the grand event on the day which the majority celebrate, Christmas Day. So, no, they did not always teach against Christmas. That's very clear. Did the Watchtower always forbid birthdays? Once again, no, they did not. Let me read from Watchtower 1940, January 1st, page 16. Pardon me for intruding on your precious time, but I just can't help letting you know how much I appreciate the phonograph, which came to me on the morning after the 8th, which was my 80th birthday. It was indeed a birthday gift from Jehovah. It goes on, but it's a good summary. Let's talk about some questionable, unmoral financial practices that the Watchtower practices. That was a bit redundant. The practices that they practice. Okay, anyway. In what ways does the Watchtower operate differently than most churches? First thing is true churches, true religions, Christian denominations don't operate like a for-profit corporation buying investments in hotels and dealing with the stock market and all of these different kinds of things. They operate like a church. They do take donations to pay for their building, to support the financial needs of the pastor, but it usually ends there. But the Jehovah's Witnesses are a massive global corporation. They make millions and they make billions of dollars. So that is questionable. True Christian churches would not accept donations if it came with a money trail showing the money was made via methods that they clearly preach against. And the Watchtower preaches heavily against in their writings making money off of things like cigarettes, pornography, many industries, the military, anything to do with war. That you're not allowed, nothing to do with working for companies like that. But they are allowed to accept investment money from businesses that are making their money off of those industries and that they know about because it's in their tax returns. So There's a lot of hypocrisy there. The other one, true churches would not go on massive campaigns to raise funds for an initiative, and then after the money was raised, change the plan entirely. So you're probably wondering, well, what the heck are you talking about? I'm not going to go into all the details in this video. You guys can look it up. But basically, the Jehovah's Witnesses went on a very large money-raising campaign. What they said was they were going to build a whole bunch of new churches. And to do this, they needed lots more donations coming in. And so they were fundraising like crazy and trying to get the congregants to support them financially in their pursuit to spread the gospel further by building a bunch of new buildings. Well, after the campaign was over, they didn't build the buildings. They did the opposite. What they did was they closed down a bunch of locations, buildings that were built by donations and donated time of their members, sold them off. And they had now, instead of having tons of congregations, all, in these little towns where you'd have maybe 75 people get together here, 125 get together an hour or two further away over here, they sold off a bunch of these buildings and made it that these individuals no longer had local congregations, that they would have to travel to the nearest city or town because their local building had been sold off. So instead of building tons more, what they did is they actually took existing buildings and put them on a rotation schedule. So for example, they could have Sunday at 10 o'clock a.m., they could have this one service, and then later on in the day, other people would be traveling in and they could come to another service in the same building. So they never corrected with the members, they never corrected how they had done this huge thing. What they did is they turned it around and said, you know what? We have some really smart people and God has shown us favor in putting this intelligence into the members' brains that they could come up with this amazing idea that we don't need to build more buildings. We just need to be a good steward of what he's already given us. So thanks for all of that money that you guys have donated, the millions and millions and millions of dollars. We'll just use it for furthering God's kingdom in another way. And by the way, thanks for building all those buildings for us, but we're not going to need them anymore. And have fun traveling 2 hours to get to our services in the morning now because you don't have a congregation local anymore. But hey, thanks for all that money. Okay, so enough of that rant. Next question. Is the Watchtower a wealthy church or are they a corporation? So legally, they are a church. They're a nonprofit. They are considered a charity. They're registered as a church. However, they make millions of dollars off of their business practices, their investments, their tax shelter, their portfolio of real estate, and on and on and on and on. So in a nutshell, because of this tax shelter and they're registered as a charity, they profit astronomical amount of money. Very, very smart financially, but also very, very crooked financially. So the next one, and this is an interesting question because there's a lot of talk about this online. People are wondering, were Russell and Rutherford Freemasons? Are Jehovah's Witnesses Freemasons? What's their attachment there? What's their link? And the truth is there's no modern day person that appears to hold the definitive answer to this. What the evidence does point towards is that there were, at the very least, indirect links, and there could still be. We don't know. The use of the Masonic imagery throughout the early publications all leads towards a very high probability, but there's really no way for us to know for sure. What I recommend you do if you want to know for sure is review in detail the icons, the images, the illustrations, and the terminology used by Russell in the early publications and compare them to Masonic images, Masonic publications. See if you notice anything in common. Next one, has the Watchtower ever been involved in astrology, spiritism, paganism, Egyptology, or pyramidology? a ton in the very beginning, but it is considered a satanic practice. Now, Pastor Russell, he was an interesting creature. He was a Zionist, so he had a love for the Jews, and he had expected they would be going back into their own lands, which they did. But he also was heavily interested in astrology and spiritism and Egyptology and pyramidology, huge into all of that kind of stuff, which are condemnable practices presently to the Watchtower. And there's countless references in Russell's Russell's questionable beliefs and practices throughout the majority of his writings and his illustrations, such as, this is taken from The Kingdom Come. Russell says, "The Great Pyramid in Egypt is a witness to all of these events of the ages of our day, testifying in symbols." So today, like I said, these symbols to the Watchtower are considered idolatry and works of Satan, but they're all over his early publications. This is where I highlighted just where he's talking about the Great Pyramid of Egypt from one of his books. So no, they're not presently admitting any direct links to Freemasonry or anything like that, but there's a lot of evidence to say that I would be highly suspect, but you don't want to bear false witness or accuse without knowing for sure, so just leave it on the highly suspect list because there's no concrete evidence. I just want to run a few of the terms by you guys that Russell would use in his writings that were Masonic terms. So Millennium Dawn, the Golden Age, Masonic terms, things like that. Knights Templar badge. Most interesting though is Russell's grave, where they spoke openly of actually the Grand Master and the Secret Order and degrees of knowledge, things like that. But then if you're really curious, go have a look at his monument near his tombstone and tell me if you see anything in common between modern Masonic imagery and this memorial monument built for him. Check that out. Next question. Now, I know I've covered it in the first video, but for those of you that have not watched it and don't intend to watch it, what is the secret Jehovah's Witness database of child molesters? So like I said, covered this in another segment, but the secret database is a database of names of predators from within their organization that have abused children and have been caught for this. Many of them have admitted it. And what the Jehovah's Witnesses do is, instead of turning them over to the police and having a proper investigation, they just hold their name and the information provided in a database that is secret, meaning that they will not turn this over to the police even when court ordered to do so. What is the two-witness rule, and what does it have to do with this global sex scandal in the Jehovah's Witnesses? The two-witness rule is their doctrine that teaches that if anybody is going to be held accountable in any way for an accusation that came against them, there must be two witnesses. So for a child who has been molested, it's not enough for them or their parents to come to the Jehovah's Witnesses and say this thing happened. There had to be a witness that actually saw it happen. And pedophiles, they don't usually work that way. Not saying they never do, but the majority of them are smart enough to know, hey, let's just, keep this private behind closed doors. So there's almost never a witness. And in this case, the Watchtower has become a safe haven for pedophiles. And so what this two-witness rule does is it attracts pedophiles to the organization, because not only are they not held accountable by the organization pays millions of dollars every year to protect them from the courts from ever being held accountable that way either. So it's very interesting, that rule. Okay, so now I want to talk about really quickly, is all of the persecution that the Jehovah's Witnesses face truly persecution because they're just Christians, or is there more to the story? Jehovah's Witnesses have consistently proven to have disregard and a mocking spirit towards man's law and governing authorities and the judicial system. A ton of persecution and bloodshed has actually come upon the Jehovah's Witnesses because of the leadership's disdain for the laws of the land of which they live, like those in Germany at the hands of Hitler and those in Malawi and so on and so forth. The United States Supreme Court said that the Jehovah's Witness organization are the most lawless of all organizations to come before their courts. So the question is it truly persecution that they're dealing with, or is there an element of retribution and consequence for the tyranny and anarchy that they feel that they're being targeted? Is it really that they're being targeted, or is there some consequence for their tyranny and for their anarchy? So that's the question. I want to take a look at the Mexico versus Malawi scandal that took place, the JWs and the 1964 persecution that came upon them, which was very tragic. There was rapes and murders and very brutal, horrible things that I won't go into details on. So what is this Mexico-Malawi scandal? Okay, so let's start off with looking at, in a nutshell, the Jehovah's Witnesses had to refuse. They were instructed by the leadership. They were instructed that they must refuse to obtain the ID card that all citizens in the land of Malawi were ordered to have, which would prove that they were a member of the present ruling party in Malawi. Watchtower insisted that the local JWs refuse to take this ID or these cards, and at the price of paying with their lives. So unfortunately, to disobey the Watchtower would mean they would be disfellowshipped, which means they would be shunned and they would lose their entire family. To disobey the Malawi law would mean that they would be tortured and killed. So they were really stuck between a rock and a hard place. Unfortunately, what ended up taking place here is the complete opposite of a similar situation from Mexico. In Mexico, Jehovah's Witnesses were also instructed that they needed to have an ID card. And the ID card in Mexico, it wasn't as severe. It's not like they would be, tortured or killed or anything without it, but it was necessary to get things like their passports in Mexico and things like that. And it's really interesting. I'm going to share with you guys what happened. But I want to talk really quickly about what took place in Malawi. So Malawi, it was a dictatorship area. So you basically had to say, you support the present government. And you needed to have a card that basically showed allegiance to this government, which was the Malawi Congress Party card that they had to have. And the Jehovah's Witnesses were taught that they always have to be separate from politics, separate from war, separate from all the elements of the world. And to take that card would say that they were attaching or tying themselves to this government, to this world, to politics, to the potential for war. And unfortunately, when they decided they were going to obey what the Watchtower was instructing them to do and not take the card, they disregarded the laws of the land, and then they paid the price with their lives for it. The Jehovah's Witnesses have a doctrine of neutrality, which basically says you will never choose one government over another. You will never pledge allegiance to one over another or to the one you live in or anything like that. There's laws of neutrality. But because they wouldn't do what they were told to do in the land they were in, they suffered many atrocities. But in Mexico, similar kind of scenario, the Cartilla card, piece of paper that declares you have adhered to the laws regarding, basic military service and stuff. All males were required to do it. Simple piece of ID that's required to get your passport, employment, so on and so forth. In Mexico, you could get one of these cards, however, just through bribery instead of doing the military service. All you had to do is you had to pay off the Mexican government officials, and then they would stamp your card. So elders in Mexico, they consulted with the Watchtower, and they wrote to them inquiring about this bribery option, if it was okay for them to be engaging in this. And Watchtower wrote back in a nutshell. They said, fine, but if you land in hot water over this, it's not going to fall on the Watchtower's shoulders, nor will we be of assistance in dealing with the consequences. And I have copies of this. I have copies of the actual letters sent to the Watchtower and the letters the Watchtower wrote back, and giving them the full green light on this, to bribe the Mexican authorities and to lie and to break the law in order to get the Cartilla card, which was not even a matter of life and death in Mexico, where it was in Malawi. And in Malawi, they were told strictly, you are not allowed to do it, or you will be disfellowshipped. But like I said, in Mexico, this was a technicality. And anyways, so they went on and they did this. The Jehovah's Witnesses in the land in Mexico, to get their Cartilla cards, that's how they got them. 9 years later, after they were still doing this, giving the green light on this corruption, the Mexican JW branch again inquired to the head office, to the Watchtower's headquarters, and said to them, do you guys realize that having these Cartilla cards automatically puts our names on the military service list, which is like, kind of forbidden. And anyways, he said in this letter, being on this list means like we could be called into service, is it still okay for us to be bribing these guys for the Cartilla cards knowing this? And Watchtower wrote back a second time saying, we already said yes. Like, why are you bothering us with this a second time? Let me reiterate it. Let me state it again. So back on September 5th, 1969, they said, we understand the matter, and you are under your own conscience to take the course of action you so choose. So here's the Watchtower doing the we hear no evil, we see no evil, when members are outright admitting to partaking in a crime in Mexico, which could actually cost them their lives. It's very, very serious to do this, serious consequences. They're bearing false witness, which is clearly biblically a sin, and it's also absolutely forbidden in the Watchtower doctrine to do this. And but then such a double standard, because over in Malawi they were forbidden, even though what would happen is if they didn't do it, they would be considered basically enemies of the land and suffer grievous consequences, and they would have to give up their lives for this. Yet they were allowed no room for exception there. So I just can't wrap my brain around it. If the brethren in Malawi would have been allowed to just have the same freedom that those in Mexico had, they wouldn't have had to, have these horrific things happening to their children right in front of them. And I won't go into details, but I mean, a lot of lives and a lot of suffering could have been spared if they could have just made the same allowance for those in Malawi that they did in Mexico. None of the atrocities would have had to have taken place. So the hypocrisy, to me, is just irreconcilable. Next question. Is there agreement within the Watchtower on who is actually the voice of God from within the Watchtower? Not even close, not a shred of it. If you look at Raymond Franz, he was actually one of the governing body. He wrote a book against the Jehovah's Witnesses after he was no longer part of the governing body. Russell and Rutherford, not the best of energy between the two of them. There has been consistent discord between and a lot of contention between the former presidents and the governing body up until now. So if you think about, if the pattern repeats itself, give it another 20, 30 years, and you're probably going to have a present member of the governing body out with their smear campaigns and stuff, and maybe a lot of the things they'll be saying will be true. So no, there is not agreement within the Watchtower on who, if any of them, are even the individual hearing from God. There's no agreement on it at all. So it makes you wonder if within their own leadership they cannot agree on who of the leaders is God's mouthpiece and who actually is the one hearing from God. Then you have to question, are any of them even truthfully right at all? So the next one here is, Do all of the former governing bodies still support the Watchtower and believe they are God's chosen organization? They don't. Like I just said, Raymond Franz, he's the author of Crisis of Conscience. Raymond Franz, he's the former governing body member. You guys got to look up that book. I know I've mentioned it a couple times. You really got to read the book. He is the author, and in the book he says, I now began to realize how large a measure of what I had based my entire adult life course on was just that, a myth, persistent, persuasive, and unrealistic. So if the former governing body, who truly are the face and the foundation of the Jehovah's Witnesses, if they do not even believe in and support the organization and the present leadership, and they don't believe that it is God's only organization, that it's God's organization at all, and they're teaching others this because they sincerely believed they were wrong, you really have to question if they are who they say they are. Now, I've already mentioned a little bit about how the Jehovah's Witnesses have a persecution complex that they hide behind when anyone speaks anything that could be even the slightest bit in opposition to them. What they do is they teach it's been foretold. This is what they do. They teach it's been foretold in the Bible that this very thing would happen. And here it is. Lo and behold, it's happening, proving even more just how enlightened they are to God's truth. Further evidence to them being truly prophets of God, his only one true religion. And what they do is they teach that Satan's world will continue coming after them because there are to be these signs leading up to Armageddon, and being persecuted by the world and Satan is just one of those signs. So the more people that attack them and have lawsuits against them for, child sex abuse and all these different things, the more they can say, see, all of these adversities we're dealing with, lo, like the time is imminent, and the Armageddon is just around the corner. Look at all these signs. So they have a way of twisting just about everything. Another thing that really bothers me is how they use accounts and videos of Christians, the Jehovah's Witness Christians being persecuted, and they use it as evidence of how they are God's only people. And they teach that, look, these people are so devoted to us, they'll lay their lives down, they'll be martyrs. And the thing is, they don't teach that other Christians throughout the world are also martyrs that aren't Jehovah's Witnesses. It's not just happening to Jehovah's Witnesses. Persecution is something that happens against individuals in many, many religions. Christianity is the main one, but it definitely doesn't happen just to the Jehovah's Witnesses. And like I said, some of the things that the Jehovah's Witnesses go through are because the way that the leadership forces them to not adhere to the laws of the land they're living in. Another thing I want to really quickly mention is, if we're thinking about persecution, the majority of the persecution that the Jehovah's Witnesses actually endure comes from the leadership itself, from within the organization, through the shunning, the mind control, the punishment, the humiliation, the shame. But being disfellowshipped and having to disassociate from your entire family is one of the worst forms of persecution a person could go through. And that is at the Jehovah's Witnesses' hands. That's not even at the hands of the world or what they consider to be the apostates. So shunning really it's inexcusable, in my opinion. Here's a question for you that came from the internet. What is the difference between Jehovah's Witnesses and Christian beliefs? One that jumps out at me is the disfellowshipping and shunning practices you don't really see so much in the Christian, like if you're a part of, let's say, an Alliance church, a Presbyterian church, a Baptist church, even a Pentecostal church. if, let's say, your mother was a Pentecostal and you were a Pentecostal and you guys went to church together for many, many years, and then all of a sudden she decided, nah, I'm not going to be a Christian anymore. Maybe I'm not going to be, maybe I'll be an atheist, or who knows, maybe I'll be a Buddhist or something. The church isn't going to tell you, that Pentecostal church is not going to forbid you from ever seeing her again. That's not the way the Protestant churches work. No, I'm not saying that there are no sects within Christianity that have leaderships that are a little unruly and dictatorships and stuff like that. There are cults within Christianity that can operate this way, but the majority of the Protestant world does not operate through shunning and disfellowshipping their members. Not like that anyways. So how many witnesses have their families broken up roughly per year as a result of this shunning practice? My findings were at the minimum is about 20,000, and the maximum on record, so there could be way more, but the maximum on record number that I found from credible sources was about 70,000 families per year were torn apart specifically because of being ordered to shun a family member. The next question, are the Jehovah's Witnesses spiritually abusive? Yes, I would say so. They also use their martyrdom type of aspect of what they suffer as part of one of many of the tools in their toolbox that they use. So from all of my years of study in the area of psychological abuse, spiritual abuse, and warfare, the best tactics that are employed that are the most effective for controlling their members are when truth is used with just a small add-on of deception. And because people, they tend to take the bait when it's most familiar, when it's most believable. So we can't deny that the Jehovah's Witnesses have been persecuted, have been martyred. They have had atrocities that they have suffered. So what the Jehovah's Witness leadership does is take all those atrocities and dress them up in such a way to make them look favorable to the doctrine that they're trying to preach. So they use it as a tool. Where does the be a good martyr for Jesus doctrine end? This is a really good question. The be a good martyr for Jesus doctrine doesn't have an end. Anyone who holds them accountable is actually just persecuting them. Anyone who disagrees with them is persecuting them. They're enacting Satan's will against them. Anyone who speaks of them poorly is lying or bearing false witness. They're disgruntled ones. They're apostates. Anyone who goes to the police regarding a crime they committed is persecuting them, just the way that Jesus and his disciples were persecuted. And if you need a blood transfusion and you were to get one and they had to disfellowship you and you spoke about it, you're persecuting them. Anyone who persecutes you as a Jehovah's Witness, you're taught to take that stripe as a good soldier, as a good steward of God, knowing that your reward will come later. So you're supposed to just accept that as a faithful servant of the Lord. Are the Jehovah's Witnesses acting like they're above the law? They don't just act like they're above the law. Earlier in this series, I read to you from court documents. They are considered to be the most lawless of all organizations that have ever gone before the Supreme Courts. They are not considered to be a law-abiding, law-fearing organization. They're held with a lot of contempt because of how lawless they are. So let's look at how they continue to handle the rampant child sex abuse cases, just as one example. Now, in defense of the predatory protective practices of the Watchtower, such as not releasing the accused names when court ordered, or evidence that they have been told that they're supposed to produce to the courts, they have this to say in response to all of their disdain and their rebellion. This is what they say. Because any human who tries to get us to compromise Bible principles really is an agent of Satan. And there's a lot of different references to this kind of material that they respond with when they're asked questions like, why are you not turning over the database to the police the way you've been, instructed, or to the authorities or to the Supreme Court, whatever it is? Why are you not doing these things that you were told that you must lawfully do? That's the kind of thing they say in response. So let's look at what they're really saying behind this. They say, because any human who tries to get us to compromise Bible principles really is an agent of Satan. But hang on here. Which Bible principle is it they're talking about? They're talking about the two-witness rule. And the two-witness rule, what they're saying is, if they were to turn over a predator and only the child or the child's family was aware of this thing that took place, they're going against Bible principles by turning this individual over, or the evidence they have. They have a very interesting way of dancing around all of this accountability. Now, if you guys haven't watched the video where I talk all about the child sex abuse cases and everything and the whole issue, it's video number 1 in this series. Please go back and watch that, because I'm not going to be going through all of that today. Do Jehovah's Witnesses know they're in a cult when they're in it? That is a really good question. Usually in the grooming phase of getting involved in a cult dynamic, a cult structure, a cult system, very rarely do even the wisest and most discerning of individuals know that they're involved or getting involved in a cult. This is where they begin to have their eyes opened. When their conscience gets so loud, or the consequences for them not being able to adhere to the rules become so grievous that they're under constant stress, like the pressure is building, they start being open to the possibility that they might not be who they say they are. Sorry about what's happening with the lighting in here, guys. The sun's coming around. And at that point, they start doing some investigating. When they start doing some investigating, like they're brave enough to go online and start looking at the stories of ex-witnesses, and what am I going to do about this bright light? I don't even know where it's coming from. Sorry, guys. When they start being brave enough to investigate, they start realizing little by little that they could be actually involved in a cult. But it's not usually right away. I know when I was in a cult, I was in a Messianic cult for about 10 years. And I didn't know until I'd been out for many years. So what is the H.M. Riley Trust Fund? And does it in any way pose any level of incongruence to the Watchtower teachings worthy of disfellowshipment? I want you guys to go look that up for yourselves. The question here is not, is it wrong for the Watchtower to make revenue off the cigarette industry, the porn industry, the military equipment industry? The question is if it's pure hypocrisy for them to be accepting and profiting from this. I'm going to show you a document. This is a tax-exempt document for H.M. Riley Trust, which is for the Watchtower. You guys can look this up. I can also send you the link. Basically, this covers about, I don't know how many millions of dollars they got from her this year. 3,143,000, something like that. I'm going to quote from an article that the Jehovah's Witnesses wrote. Is it wise to invest in the stock market? Page 25 to 27. By considering the background of a company, an investor can also ensure that his money will not be used to support an unethical enterprise. So that's from Awake, February 8th, 1962. And so the question is there hypocrisy regarding all of the different types of investments? This one that I just talked about being one of them. Is there hypocrisy in what they're teaching their members to what they are practicing behind closed doors in the way that they're dealing with their finances? Here's some additional thoughts for you guys as well. If biblical-based Christianity is your conviction, I want you guys to look up Galatians 1, 6-8 and ask yourselves, is the gospel that Paul and the disciples taught truly the same gospel the Watchtower teaches? Or are there differences, and what are they? Another thing to think about, seeing that modern-day Jehovah's Witnesses reject most of the teachings of its founders, which was Russell and Rutherford, is it possible that in the future witnesses will be taught things that are opposing what they're being taught now? They're going to abandon their present beliefs and bring on new teachings, maybe more so to do with the United Nations. Look into that. That's how it's looking to me. The next one, can God's children read and understand the scriptures individually, or do they require an organization or its publications to do so? You guys can answer in the comments below what you think on that one. Next one. What would happen if the Watchtower were to discover Jehovah's Witnesses discussing amongst themselves opinions that differ from the Orthodox Watchtower doctrine? What would happen to them? I'd be curious to know what you guys think. Another one. Has the society ever taught anything that they later determined to be incorrect? And is there any possibility that anything they're teaching today could also be incorrect, and it will be determined later as well? Does the Watchtower match the description and warning given in 2 Timothy 3, verses 1-17? Look it up and let me know if you see anything interesting there in the comments below. Now here's a really interesting one. What is the Watchtower's position presently on Zionism? I'm going to just read you something that they state. By the publication of Volume 2 of the Book of Vindication that year, Jehovah's Witnesses came to see that such a Back to Palestine movement was by the spirit of Satan. Okay, so we're going to go forward. But presently, Watchtower denounces Zionist teachings as from Satan, where the previous 60 years they actively were teaching it. And so if you guys have a look at just the concept of Zionism from the beginning of the Watchtower until now, and where it made its shift, they admit to teaching via the spirit of Satan a doctrine for roughly 60 years because of how much they oppose it now. Now, what human injustices do females face when being involved with the Watchtower? There are many, many. They have to be heterosexual. That's the first one. They're never allowed to be an elder. They're taught to obey their husbands. They're not allowed on any judicial committees. If they are sexually assaulted, they're often blamed as the victims for consenting to it, such as in the Watchtower 1968, June 1st, page 345 to 350, where they say, by no means would it be proper to quietly submit to rape, as that would be consenting to fornication. So what about, gay, transgender, other gender differences, other sexual orientations? What do they have to teach about this? According to the JWs, pedophilia comes from being gay. Being gay is considered to be a spiritual sickness influenced by Satan, and the only way to correct it or for it to be cured is through a prayer and Bible reading. I'm going to go through a bunch more questions here just really, really quickly that were found on both Google and YouTube, but I'm not going to give explanations. I'm just going to summarize the answers I found. Why do Jehovah's Witnesses not celebrate birthdays? Number one, they consider it to be pagan. Number two, there was only 2 accounts in the Bible that involved birthdays, and in both accounts, somebody was killed. No good happened on those days. So they consider it to be a pagan practice that is influenced by the devil. Why do Jehovah's Witnesses not accept blood transfusions? Because there is a scripture that says we should not consume blood, and they consider that consuming blood, they also consider it that you would be taking on the personality of that person by doing it. Why do Jehovah's Witnesses not celebrate Christmas? And what do Jehovah's Witnesses believe about Christmas? In a nutshell, they used to teach that you could celebrate Christmas and that it was fine. Now they teach that it's pagan and involves a lot of idolatry, like the Christmas tree and so on and so forth. And it's not even Jesus's birthday anyways. So for those reasons, they do not celebrate Christmas. What do Jehovah's Witnesses do? The Jehovah's Witnesses teach the truth? I haven't found a lot of truth that they teach. But I'm not going to say that everything they teach is false. They have some good principles. I like that they teach, to be morally clean. They teach that. I'm not saying that they are, but they teach things like, not watching really graphic sexual movies and stuff like that. So I like that they're teaching kids not to maybe partake in some of the things that they partake in nowadays, to maybe limit some of the things they're being exposed to on the internet. So they have some wholesome practices they teach. It's not all horrible. What do the Jehovah's Witnesses believe? Well, they believe a lot of things. One of the things they believe is that we're about to walk into the days of Armageddon, where only the Jehovah's Witnesses will be protected, and basically everyone else on the face of the earth, including ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, will be slain by Jesus and his angels when he comes back to enact his vengeance and to take over and build his new earth. What Bible do the Jehovah's Witnesses use? They use their own translation, which is the New World Translation. Do Jehovah's Witnesses vote? No, they do not. Do the Jehovah's Witnesses worship Jesus? No, they do not. They stopped worshiping Jesus in 1954, and they no longer see him as deity at all. What do Jehovah's Witnesses say when they knock at your door? Usually they engage in kind of a very loving, hey, how's life? Oh, you're having problems? Well, we have solutions to your problems all in this book. Are you interested in the Bible? Do you believe in the Bible? We'd like to offer you a free Bible study. Things like that. Very engaging, very loving, kind of a robotic, monotone. They're kind of somewhat dissociated, a lot of them, when they come to your door. I mean, it doesn't seem like a very sincere, authentic engagement that you're having with another fellow human being. It's very scripted and so on. What do the Jehovah's Witnesses believe about Michael the Archangel, and what do Jehovah's Witnesses believe about Jesus Christ? So the Jehovah's Witnesses believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God and that he is Michael the Archangel from the scriptures, but they don't believe that he is God or that he has any deity whatsoever. Why do Jehovah's Witnesses knock on doors? As a pioneer, once they're baptized into the witnesses, they have to be an evangelist. They have to do the pioneer work, which includes handing out pamphlets, so on and so forth, going door to door. So that's why they're doing that. They don't have a choice. It's not like you can become a Jehovah's Witness and get baptized into the church and then just go to church on Sunday. Like, you actually have to become kind of like a missionary now. When do Jehovah's Witnesses go to church? They don't go on Saturday, the way like the Messianics do, which is the Sabbath day. They go on Sunday. What do you do when Jehovah's Witnesses come knocking to your door? There's a few things you can do. You could direct them to this video series if you wanted. You could maybe have some copies of Raymond Franz, have copies of his book. He is an ex-elder governing body member. Maybe you could give them one of those. But whatever you do, show them compassion, mercy, patience, love, kindness. Don't be rude, don't be haughty, don't be hateful, don't be arrogant and puffed up and act like you know better. Realize that these people got involved with this organization most likely, not necessarily for everyone, but most likely because they truly want to know and serve God. And interact with them from that place, please. What do I say when Jehovah's Witnesses come to my door? So I used to have more patience for it, but I've come to the place where if anybody comes to my door, honestly, anymore, I just kind of say no thank you and I close the door, because I don't I don't like being interrupted. That's the main thing. I don't like having to talk to people or be interrupted. Why do Jehovah's Witnesses get married so young? This is because they're taught, and I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but they're taught that to have a sexual relationship before marriage is wrong and is sinful. And so what they do is they get married young so that way they can go on and, yeah. How do Jehovah's Witnesses baptize? This is a good question. Jehovah's Witnesses baptism is very different from a Protestant baptism. When you are baptized in an Alliance church, a Presbyterian church, any of these other Protestant denominations, you're baptized in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, according to the book of Matthew. In the Jehovah's Witnesses organization, you are not being baptized, not according to the book of Matthew. You are being baptized as a Jehovah's Witness. You're not being baptized in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. You're not being baptized as a Christian. You are literally, you are solidifying a vow to them to be one of them and to serve them for the rest of their life. There's nothing even in common with the biblical baptism and this water immersion that follows with a vow to be a Jehovah's Witness forever. Nothing in common. They're not the same. If you were baptized in the Alliance Church, let's say, and you became a witness, they would baptize you again because that didn't count. So that just shows you they're different. How do Jehovah's Witnesses make money? Some of them just have normal jobs, but a lot of them actually, they tend to live in tight-knit communities together where they have little businesses and they employ other Jehovah's Witnesses. So there has been actually quite a lot of legal issue with the fact that they rarely are going to be interested in hiring non-Jehovah's Witnesses to work within their companies. So what they do is they pool together, hire a bunch of witnesses, and a lot of the income just stays within their own sect. Why are there so many Jehovah's Witness horror stories? This is a good question, and in a nutshell, there are so many Jehovah's Witness horror stories because so many Jehovah's Witnesses have horrible things that happen to them just because they are Jehovah's Witnesses. What Jehovah's Witnesses documentary would you recommend? I don't know of any Jehovah's Witnesses documentaries, yet there are a ton of ex-Jehovah's Witness YouTubers out there, and I would highly recommend you subscribe to their channel, check out their content. Should Jehovah's Witnesses debate, or will they be reprimanded? Jehovah's Witnesses are only allowed to engage with other members that aren't witnesses for the intent of recruiting them. So if they can tell that you're not interested and there's nothing they can say or do to convince you, they're really not going to be that interested in continuing interacting with you. Jehovah's Witnesses beliefs, are they all wrong? Like I said, they're not all wrong. There are some things that are very scary that I would say are definitely teachings to stay away from. But no, there's not. You can't put anybody into like one little box. So I wouldn't say that everything that they teach is wrong, but a huge percentage of what they teach is wrong. Ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, are they really just disgruntled apostates? Actually, very few of them are just disgruntled apostates. Many of them have been badly, badly wounded and hurt. And the reason they're speaking up is because they're trying to do what they can to prevent other people from actually having to go through the same thing. How do Jehovah's Witnesses recruit? The number one means of recruitment is door to door, but they also use their businesses and the places they work to recruit by like leaving pamphlets, interacting and engaging with other co-workers and things like that. But it's usually by offering a free Bible study. How do you leave the Jehovah's Witnesses? This is a really tough one because you have to be very careful in how you leave, because if you leave the wrong way, you'll be shunned by your friends and family that are witnesses. So you have to do your investigating, and the best thing to do is interact with other ex-witnesses and find a way that you can leave without being shunned by the rest of the Jehovah's Witness friends and family that you have. What do Jehovah's Witnesses believe about their friends and family? They have two belief systems. For those that are a witness and their friends and family are also Jehovah's Witnesses, they believe that they're all going to live in the new earth together and happily ever after and lay down with the lions and the lambs and all of that lovely stuff. If their friends and family are not witnesses, then they believe that they're going to see them being tortured in Armageddon, and that it's their number one job to do everything they possibly can to prevent that from happening by getting them to become a witness and to stay an active witness. They also see their friends and family that aren't witnesses or are ex-witnesses as being like apostates. What can you say to a Jehovah's Witness if you're a Christian? I would say don't make it your mission to make them a project that you need to save from the organization. Show them love and kindness and patience, and if you can and you have opportunities to share like this video series or Raymond Fran's book or other ex-witness material, I would do that. Is the Watchtower a liar? Well, if you consider a liar to be somebody that says a lot of things that are not true, then yes. Is sexual abuse within the Jehovah's Witnesses true? Yes, it absolutely is. Is sexual assault within the Jehovah's Witnesses marriage a problem? Yes, about 30% of the cases that are reported to the police are things that happen within the home between a husband and a wife. Who is the founder of the Jehovah's Witnesses? I think I mentioned that already. That's Charles Taze Russell. Who founded the Jehovah's Witnesses? That is Charles Russell as well. Why do Jehovah's Witnesses leave the Watchtower? There are a ton of reasons, but usually it's that the oppressive control and abuse becomes more than they can handle. They can no longer conform, and they rather remove themselves voluntarily or they're disfellowshipped. What is the Australian Royal Commission of Jehovah's Witnesses? This is one of the situations where there was a huge sex scandal uncovered to do with the child sexual abuse. You guys can look that up. Armageddon and the Jehovah's Witnesses, what do they believe? Like I said, they believe that it's actually just around the corner, that it is imminent, that it could happen any day now. Apostate Jehovah's Witnesses, what are they? Apostate Jehovah's Witnesses are people that were witnesses that are no longer witnesses, and the Jehovah's Witnesses believe that they're going to be also killed in Armageddon. Are Jehovah's Witnesses pagan? It depends on how you define pagan. Modern day practice, the majority of the Jehovah's Witnesses try to stay away from most modern day pagan practices. But if you look at the earlier days in the times of Russell and Rutherford, they would have been considered to be very pagan back then, according to JW writings and standards. Are Jehovah's Witnesses real friends? I'm guessing this means, can you have a Jehovah's Witness that's a real friend? If you are just a modern day individual that's not a Christian, that's not a Jehovah's Witness, you have to understand, if you have a JW in your life that is acting like your friend, most likely, I'm not saying for sure, but most likely, they're seeing you as an individual that needs to be saved, as someone that needs to be evangelized properly and brought into the kingdom, that you're their project now to save. If you clearly show them that you will have zero interest ever in having a free Bible study or anything like that, most likely over time they will distance themselves from you. XJW cult warnings, where to find the truth. You can find tons of amazing videos on YouTube, individuals that have got out of the organization. Brainwashing, JWs, do they do it? There are so many different brainwashing techniques and strategies that they use. They absolutely do. Brainwash Jehovah's Witnesses, how to get through to them. Honestly, in a lot of cases, you're just not going to be able to do that. I've already told you guys what is the secret Jehovah's Witnesses database of child molesters. We've talked about that. Jehovah's Witnesses indoctrination process, how does it work? It starts off with just the free Bible study that they offer, and it becomes a repetitive thing, like a commitment to go repeatedly. And then from there, they really encourage you to get baptized, because that means that you're now technically one of them, which means you'll have God's protection at Armageddon. And it just kind of goes on from there. If they're having a Sunday service, you are expected to be there. It's not optional. If you can't attend, you have to dial into a phone number where you will listen to the service over the phone. If you don't do that, then there is the risk of being disfellowshipped for that. Do Jehovah's Witnesses shun? Yes, they do. Like I said, up to about 70,000 per year. What are the good things about the Jehovah's Witnesses? Like I said, they teach a lot of wholesome things as well, so that's good. Is Jehovah's Witnesses actually a nonprofit? They're legally a nonprofit, but they do not operate like one. Who is Erwin Zalkin of the Jehovah's Witnesses? He is a lawyer that handles very large class action lawsuits and individual lawsuits against the Jehovah's Witnesses, specifically for the child sexual abuse stuff. What is the most scary thing in the Jehovah's Witnesses? I would say the lawlessness and the lack of respect for human life, generally speaking, their infringements on human rights. What is the one question Jehovah's Witnesses cannot answer? One of the big ones they can't answer is, how do they know that they are the only mouthpiece of God? How do they know for sure that they are? What is the Watchtower Society of the Jehovah's Witnesses? This is just really another name for their organization. YouTubers that are Jehovah's Witnesses, do they exist? Presently, if you're a Jehovah's Witness, you're discouraged from having like any mention of them on social media, on YouTube. So you're not really allowed to be a YouTuber if you're a present Jehovah's Witness in good standing, but there are tons of YouTubers that are ex-Jehovah's Witnesses. Abuse in the Jehovah's Witnesses, do they ever talk about it? Not very much, because anybody that talks about the Jehovah's Witnesses in a way that's negative is talked about as like a complainer, a naysayer, a disgruntled one. So they're actually very much discouraged from talking about those things. Are sex offenders hidden in the Jehovah's Witnesses? Yes, I told you there's like many, well over 20,000 documented ones so far, predators and pedophiles that are actively Jehovah's Witnesses. Watchtower and the Awake, are they inspired? There are places where Jehovah's Witnesses claim they are. There are places where Jehovah's Witnesses have claimed that it's not. My personal opinion is that it's not inspired, but we'll have to leave God to judge that one. What brainwashing techniques do Jehovah's Witnesses use to gain control over so many people? There's a few that I want to talk about. The lack of transparency, openness, and honesty are the main one. The lack of transparency. So they'll use tactics to dance around the truth. They won't answer questions directly. They'll answer questions with questions and give misleading answers to curtail the truth. They play the semantics game in response to direct questions, because they know if they give just a direct answer, they'll look crazy and dangerous and the deception will be clearly seen. So they don't really do that very much. They use the free Bible study that they run as part of their indoctrination process to kind of gradually groom this individual into a vulnerable and submissive state. So those are some of the brainwashing techniques they use. But the half-truths, I'd say, is the biggest one. Okay, a few more quick questions, and then we're going to wrap it up. Do Jehovah's Witnesses tithe? Jehovah's Witnesses are expected to give the bulk of their extra money to the Watchtower, and they're to set up their lifestyle to be such Very, very simple. So they have enough money to give the watchtower plenty. They're also encouraged to leave the watchtower as the recipient to their will when they pass away. So that way they get a huge amount of money once you're no longer alive either. Do Jehovah's Witnesses believe in miracles? They teach that the miracles ended back in the Bible days and that there no longer are miracles. Do the Jehovah's Witnesses believe in baptism? The only baptism they believe in is the one that they do, where they baptize this individual into the Jehovah's Witnesses organization. Do the Jehovah's Witnesses celebrate the New Year? No. Do Jehovah's Witnesses drink alcohol? Very, very rarely, in moderation. Do Jehovah's Witnesses eat pork? They don't follow the kosher laws. So a lot of them do, yes. Do Jehovah's Witnesses eat meat? Jehovah's Witnesses are not the same as the Seventh-day Adventists, where they're like vegetarian. So they do eat meat. Do Jehovah's Witnesses believe they go to heaven? No, they don't believe that they do. Do Jehovah's Witnesses make money? The watchtower makes a fortune, but the individual Jehovah's Witnesses are taught to not have anything to do with the ways of the world, and riches and wealth is all part of that. So they have regular jobs, but they're more, they tend to not be the world's most wealthy people, and they're discouraged from like post-secondary education that could get them like really high paying jobs and things like that. Do Jehovah's Witnesses question their own doctrine? They're taught that that would be the works of the devil to do that, so very rarely do they do that until they're at the point where they're pretty much prepared to leave the organization. So here's some of my beliefs and concerns regarding the Jehovah's Witnesses and how they sit with me. The human rights of a person should never be infringed upon because of their religion. Everyone should be free to believe according to their conscience, and they should never have to fear severe consequence and persecution from their own church for believing a little bit differently, for not seeing eye to eye on every single thing. So there should be freedom, but there's no freedom being a Jehovah's Witness. You have to be a robot. You have to be a cookie cutter person. You have to refuse to think for yourself. So in what ways do they infringe upon human rights? Tons, but let's just cover the ones that bother me most. Individual Jehovah's Witnesses will be shunned for taking or giving blood, like even to their children, the child that may die. They may be shunned for leaving, so their conscience just can't do it anymore. They don't want to be a witness anymore. They'll be shunned for that. Shunned for breaking any rules, things like that. So that really infringes upon the human rights, because shunning means you are no longer allowed to even be considered a living human being to your friends and family. Like you're considered dead. So that's the first one, the shunning. The fact that they consider themselves above the law, and by acting this out, children are continuously being hurt by these individuals that they are protecting. I have huge problems with that. So there's no protection of children, no support for the law enforcement that are trying to protect these children. So I have huge problems with how they act above the law, and therefore many people get hurt, and there's absolutely no justice for these perpetrators and for the families at all. The third thing is there's no equal rights for women at all. Like no equal rights for women. And the last one, there's no equal rights for those that have diverse sexual orientations or genders. Like it's all considered sin, and no place for them in the organization whatsoever. So these people that maybe are not, that are unique that way, gender-wise or sexual orientation-wise, they have to have that in secret. That can't be out in the open, so they have to live a double life. So that kind of is a summary of all of the extra questions that I never got to. So when thinking about who is the Jehovah's Witnesses, are they who they claim to be, I would like to leave you with 4 questions to consider when calculating and deciding, considering for yourself who the Jehovah's Witnesses truly are, if they could be who they claim to be. I want you to consider these 4 things for yourself. What does your conscience and human decency teach us? Think about that and think about everything you've learned about them. And after you've researched it to verify if everything I've said is true or not, decide for yourself if your conscience is okay with all of that, what you have learned. The second thing, what do the laws of the land teach us? You know, I can't say we're living in a perfect system in this world, that's for sure. But there are laws in the land that we live in that are set up for the protection of our human rights. It's getting watered down pretty good as of late, but they still are there. A little sliver here, a little sliver there. But things like child protection, those laws are there. And there are police officers and people that we can go to that can help us. And I want you to ask yourself, if you were to be in a situation where your child had been harmed this way, if you would want society to aid you and the authorities in protecting that child. Think about that. Okay, think about that. So what do the laws of the land teach us, and in what ways are they in opposition to that? The next one, what does the Bible teach? If the Bible is your measuring stick for what is right and what is wrong, then look at the Bible itself. And I'm not talking about their translation, because that has been changed a lot. Look at something like a NIV, an English Standard Version, a King James Version, something like that. What does the Bible teach us the Jehovah's Witnesses are? And lastly, what does the Watchtower teach through their own literature and history and practices and doctrine and changes in doctrine over the years? Just look at them, and based on just observing them, who are the Jehovah's Witnesses, in your opinion? So you want to look at things like discrepancies, inconsistencies, incongruency over the years, all of that kind of thing, and decide for yourself, who are they? I want to wrap this up really quickly by saying anything that I've shared in any of these 10 videos, anything that you guys have learned that I have said that is not accurate in your opinion, I would like to hear about it in the comments below. I will investigate every single thing, every single comment where I have shared something that is not true will not be deleted. I will leave it there. I will investigate the thing you're asking me to investigate. And if I have said anything wrong in that particular video, I'm going to pin the comment where I've been corrected. And then I am going to provide what I have found to be true in that. I'm going to copy it as a response. So I want you guys to know that I'm definitely open to correction on anything that I have said. And if you guys can point me in the direction of a source that is reliable, that teaches anything whatsoever that I've said that maybe is not true, I'm going to keep that resource available for those that are coming back to read through the comments. So please do share. I'm open to correction. You guys can have a log of all of my resources. Like I said, there's over about 500 different links to different sources, and you guys can have access to that. Just shoot me an email. And that's about it. So I hope that each of you will find the peace and truth that you're looking for, and that whatever answers you were looking for in this 10-part series, look at that sun right there. Whatever answers you're looking for, I really hope that you have found them, and that you won't end your research and study here. That this is just one more step in your journey to truth. And if you are a present witness and this has been very, very difficult for you, I just want to commend you for the courage that you have had to get to this point where you're open to considering other possibilities, other opinions than what you have been taught. It takes a ton of courage. So this is about it, guys. It's Carol Bird here, and I wish each of you the absolute best.